Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, if you tuned in to our last solo flight special edition, you heard the topic of the false perception and narrative, as well as the impact that it has on the arena of American politics. I want to take this opportunity to expand upon that topic, because it's important to help explain why the 2016 presidential election cycle has been the most heated, contentious, and personalized in living memory. Now, all of this, or at least a vast majority of this, could be laid squarely at the feet of the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian, Donald Trump, also known as John Barron, also known as John Miller. But I don't think he can take the blame for this alone, because it goes hand in hand with two other nefarious elements which have been working in tandem to help thwart the will of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic of ours, and I of course speak of we the people. You see, this narrative is being pushed by not only the Donaldas, but also the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, and the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. And it's perhaps more nefarious with respect to the gutless opposition party, because what they're doing is purposefully going against the very will of their people. They are the ones that have shrouded themselves in lie after lie, and have gone about on a deceitful campaign to dupe their voters. Then they run around like a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off when they figured out that the American people are getting sick and tired of this. Politics as usual is just not going to cut it. That's why the salivating mainstream media has been pushing this narrative of the 2016 election cycle is the one in which we will completely discard with conventional wisdom. In a way, they're hopeful for that, because it means that they can then double down on their twisted Fabian socialist agenda, which is diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets that underpin this republic of ours, and also against the true sense of popular sovereignty. The reason that they are saying this, or expounding upon such a message, is because they loathe and despise the fact that the people are the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this country by design. That's something that they've never enjoyed. That's something that they've feared. And if you step back and look at it from their perspective, it's that they fear that the American people will rise up in revolt, much like they did to the crown of Great Britain at the inception of this country in the American War of Independence. You see, it's an inherent part of our DNA to be distrustful of centralized authority. It goes all the way back to the foundation of this country, and that's something that they understand. Now, they act like and feign that they don't believe this, but it truly is a part of their mindset. They begin to see themselves as an elite, a separate entity which is far apart and above the so-called unwashed Hun, or the true wielders of sovereignty in this country. Believe it or not, that is the strain of anger that Donald Trump has utilized and unleashed throughout this campaign season. But the whole thing is that he's done it in a deceitful manner. He's not telling the truth. He's not showing you who he really is. This is all about a type of political kabuki theater in which he is attempting to pull the wool over the eyes of the absolute sovereigns. Why? Well, it comes down to power. You know, power is the aphrodisiac, for lack of a better term, for those who wish to wield the reins of power. They see that as a way to cement their popularity, to cement their place or status within society as a superior branch or member or coffee clutch even. It's all designed to make themselves feel better about themselves at the expense of the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty. That's a great danger. That's the type of system that will allow anger to be used as a blinding force to then be thrust into the edifice of political power in the Republic, thereby destroying it, opening the pathway for the Fabian socialists to build their socialist dystopia. And let's face it, folks, anywhere that socialism has ever been tried in this world, it has failed. And it is but by the sheer arrogance of its most ardent acolytes that they claim that it's only because, maybe it's just because the wrong people have done it. We're smarter, we can get it right. You know, repeating something time and time again with the expectation of different results is the epitome of insanity. But that's where we are, as a nation and a people right now. We are being run by the insane. We are being governed by cowards, with a childlike mindset that is different and detrimental to the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of the American people. It's a dangerous place for a nation to be, and it means that our people are going to only grow more and more angry as the days and the months and the years pass by. This is all created from a lack of leadership. We have suffered through 2 horrendous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime without any facet or form of leadership in the United States, and it shows. It shows in all of the weakness that is popping up throughout this country. Think of it this way. In 2016, during the first quarter, our GDP only grew by 0.5%. That is ridiculous. That is not growth. That is weakness. Yet we are told by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that we are still in the midst of some great recovery after the Great Recession. I'm going to tell you right now, folks, there is no great recovery. We have not experienced recovery. We have only experienced tepid flows on a downward spiral that has been perpetuated by the failed public policies of the Obama regime. There's no way to cut that. There's no way to sugarcoat that or to sweep it under the rug. Those are the facts, and they're glaring, open, and obvious, staring us in the face. And here we are, in one of the most important election cycles of this nation's history, at least of living memory, and we're in a soap opera, a drama. But it's more of a melodrama than a real drama. It is a cult of personality versus a true constitutionalist, and then there is a false narrative being perpetuated again by the salivating mainstream media that is designed to blind the American people to at least half of the story, thereby destroying the truth, or attempting to hide the truth. But if there's one thing that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, The Wright Flyer, it's that the truth always has a way of shining through. Its light can penetrate even the most articulate and intricate web of deceit, and it will serve to set us all free. Because the truth has no agenda, folks. So, we see that the media perpetuates a lie. And the biggest lie that they're perpetuating right now is that the contest for the gutless opposition party, or GOP, is between an insurgent candidate and another insurgent candidate. Well, when we take it from this idea that it's the election of political outsiders, perhaps they're right, except that Donald Trump is not an outsider. You see, the perception has been created that he's an outsider, but if we take a step back and look at this in an objective fashion, we will see the truth. And the truth is that Donald J. Trump is about as far from an insurgent outsider as one can possibly be. For the vast majority of his adult life, he has been funding the so-called establishment. He has been supporting the Democrats, and the worst among them, These are the worst offenders that are doing everything that has driven the American people to the point of blind rage and fury that we have experienced all throughout this campaign thus far. But that raises the significant question of why. This is one of those questions that has never been posed to Donald. Why? Because, again, that would be contrary to the propagandistic agenda that these nefarious forces have. It would go against everything that they are working to put into place, and as they strive to implement that, they don't want the American people to realize that this is working in their detriment, or to their detriment. You see, guilt by association is something that does exist in politics. While it shouldn't be used in a criminal sense, or a criminal law sense, guilt by association should be at least analyzed with respect to the arena of American politics, because you are best known by the people you choose to associate yourself with. It speaks volumes about the type of personal beliefs and deeply held convictions you have. One of the questions that Jeremy has posed time and again, which we haven't really received a decent answer with respect to, is what are Donald Trump's principles? Where in the United States Constitution can you find his principles? The truth is, you're not going to be able to find his principles anywhere within the Constitution, because he doesn't believe in the Constitution. He even came out and said himself that he's not once read the Constitution because he didn't see any value in it. What an asinine statement, but it's also a profound statement because it provides a window into the heart, soul, and mind of the man who's vying for the nomination of the gutless opposition party, or GOP. It's fascinating that he has created this perception with the help of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to convince the base of the party, or at least the disillusioned conservatives or the disenfranchised conservatives, that he shares their views. But if you stop and pose the question to him, he never gives you any details. He never expounds upon what his beliefs are. He just gives these meaningless platitudes that, sure, anybody can give a bumper sticker slogan and sound good. Everybody has the ability to do that. In fact, it's like when he retweeted a quote from Il Duce of Italy, the great, if you want to call him that, great in his own mind dictator, Benito Mussolini. He said it's a great quote. Well, yes, anything taken out of context and put into small little soundbite clips can sound good. That's the danger of reducing an entire political cycle and season and system into political soundbites, into these media soundbites. It's as though they have, through their own efforts, sought to drive the attention span of the American people into such little bits that we could never get the full scope or picture of what's happening in our nation. Again, folks, this is by design. It's by design to create a false narrative and perception, as I had mentioned in that last show. But the problem with perception is when you start to get facts, that's when perspective comes in. And with the story about former Ohio Congressman and Speaker of the House, John Boehner, coming out and endorsing Donald Trump by saying that he would vote for Trump if he got the nomination, but he wouldn't vote for Ted Cruz, because Texas Senator Ted Cruz, as far as he's concerned, is Lucifer in the flesh and the most miserable SOB that he's ever worked with. You see, folks, that is doubling down on the asinine ad hominem and personalized attacks that have become the hallmark of the 2016 election cycle. It's a dangerous position to thrust the country because it is so detached from reality. But they don't care about reality. Reality would stand against them, would work against the twisted machinations and goals and agenda that they have worked up for themselves. That is something which they could not simply tolerate, and therefore they're going to double down on these efforts. Then more news came out that John Boehner is texting buddies and golf buddies with the New York Vulgarian as well. Yet Donald Trump is supposedly an outsider? That's the narrative that we're supposed to buy? That somebody who is getting endorsements from people like Chris Christie, from people like John Boehner, and from John Huntsman, all of the establishment or so-called establishment simply throwing in their hands and saying, look, Donald Trump is the inevitable nominee? You see, again, that's the establishment trying to choose our candidate. They're afraid that if it goes to a contested convention, that Ted Cruz, through his superior ground game, is going to be able to clinch the nomination. So they spin a couple of false narratives to create, once again, a false perception. This time, the perception is that Ted Cruz is unelectable, unwinnable, that he can't win because the party is too hopelessly divided, and it would be seen as Cruz stealing the election. But there's a couple of problems with that. First and foremost, most of Donald Trump's support came from Democrats crossing over the aisle in open primary states, thereby diluting the true outcome of what conservatives want. You see, that is the creation of a false narrative, creation of a false perception. And the media is using that to hammer a point that Donald Trump is the inevitable nominee. Donald Trump is the only one who can win, and therefore we should all just throw in the towel and let him in. Again, this is a combination of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media working in tandem to force their desires down our throats, irrespective of our true hopes, dreams, aspirations, and will. You see, that's backwards from how things are supposed to be. That's diametrically opposed to the way that our founding fathers originally intended for this representative republic to work. But again, they don't care. They are diametrically opposed to that because they see the Constitution as blocking them. They see it as working against their interests. But shouldn't that let everyone know and alert everyone to the fact that they are not working in our best interest, that they are seeking self-aggrandizement at our expense? You see, folks, that's the reality. That's the truth. And again, you're never going to hear this from the salivating mainstream media. And you certainly wouldn't hear it from somebody like John Boehner. So then, when Ted Cruz said that he's never really worked with Boehner, the Trump followers, or the Trump camp at least, tried to come out with this narrative of, well, he was John Boehner's lawyer. No, he was the associate to John Boehner's lawyer. He was a junior associate at the start of his law practice. I've been a junior associate on cases. Doesn't mean that I actually know the client or ever met the client. I just worked for the partner that was handling the case, and that made sure that the information was made available to the client. But it never meant that I had any FaceTime with the client, or even really got to know the client. But, you see, they leave those details out. Why? Again, to create a false narrative and perception. They see that as the opportunity to spin the news story to the way they want it. That is bias. But more than just bias, that is unquestionably a form of propaganda. And John Boehner, along with the Trump camp, are doing everything in their power to create a false narrative, to fool, dupe, and deceive the American people. But when it comes down to the real time for crunching, real crunch time, during the general election, the false narrative will be even more twisted. Because at that point, the gloves come off, and the Democrats, along with their allies from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, will no longer give Trump the sort of light-handed, light-hearted coverage that he's received. They'll remove his Teflon coating, and they will make all of these inconsistencies and intricicities about him just stick. And when they stick, that means that he will not come out of it unharmed. And you have to stop and wonder whether this was all by design, whether Donald Trump has been a useful pawn on purpose. that he's going to get some payment out of it. Because we even heard in his closing speech after the New Hampshire primaries that he's greedy, he likes money, he embraces greed for greed's sake. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb here and go fully utopian socialist here and say that greed in and of itself per se is a bad thing, because greed can be harnessed to create greater things, to be used to power a greater system that benefits all. That's what a free market system is all about. But the way he's doing it is it's not about anything else. It's not being harnessed for anything other than his own power. That is the type of greed which is destructive. And so here we see that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been going hand in hand with Trump, attacking him in a certain way that only galvanizes those who are his most vocal supporters. And it brings up that old adage that the squeaky wheel is the first to get oil. That's where you're going to spend the most time and energy and effort to resolve it. Everything else becomes secondary. That's a way that you warp perspective. And through warping perspective, you create false perceptions. So again, we have to take a step back and use true perspective, which is driven by the objective truth, to find out what's really happening. Think about it. When you look at Donald Trump's record, you don't see a man who supports traditional conservative values. He never really has. He gave $25,000 to the current governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, thereby allowing him to win. And we all know that Terry McAuliffe is now pushing to have convicted felons in the state of Virginia be able to vote, thereby creating a permanent Democrat voting bloc to change a swing state into a blue Democrat-dominated state. And you have to wonder why Donald Trump would have ever given him $25,000. Now, I can already hear in the back of my mind the shrill tones of the Trumpsters saying that I'm being ridiculous, that I'm not pointing to all the facts here, that Trump, as a businessman, has given to both sides. Okay, yes, he's given to both sides. He gave Ted Cruz $5,000. That's $20,000 less than he gave Terry McAuliffe. $20,000 left than he gave to a frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist who wants nothing more than to destroy our representative Republican system of government. But the Trump followers, they discount this. They don't consider that to be true. Instead, they go to printly.com, a fake website that has now even put up a picture of, and it looked photoshopped to me, of Rick Perry with Donald Trump and some other people trying to say that in the last minute Rick Perry pulled his support from Cruz and threw it behind Trump. You know, that would be suicide for Rick Perry, because Texans wouldn't go for that, at least not the vast majority of them, and it doesn't fit the character of the man. Rick Perry did not throw his support behind Donald Trump, but this just goes to show how deceitful they have been throughout this entire campaign season. And it's damaging and destructive. I've never seen anything quite like this in my life. Never have I seen so many lies be spewed that it even infiltrates into just the average, ordinary person's life as just the abject truth. In the past, the way that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media would lie is they would just bury the truth. It would be on page 7 instead of in page 1, where it should have most prominently been. But now, it's nowhere to be found. It's completely discarded. And this is why the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been so giddy in their repeated proclamations that the 2016 election cycle is the one in which we discard with conventional wisdom. Because conventional wisdom would be that you could still find the truth in their writings. And they are purposefully trying to get away from that because they find that it hampers their propagandistic agenda. They want to become like Pravda, the Soviet state-run newspaper where they just repeat the party line, except that their party has always been the Fabian socialists and the big government types. Never in the best interests of the American people, not since the time of William Randolph Hearst and his yellow journalism and the ownership of a conglomeration of newspapers. You see, he had a monopoly on American information and news, and he used it to spin a narrative of his own liking. Now, going back to this guilt of association, which is part of this expansion on false narratives and perceptions in an election cycle, we see that Matt Drudge, who used to be a paragon of conservative virtue, who was a leading light in conservative media as an alternative to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, has become the Pravda wing of the Trump camp. He is burying any news about Ted Cruz and doing anything to continue the false narrative that there is no way that Cruz can win and that this is a done deal, it's over, and that it won't go straight to the campaign and be a long drawn-out fight, which is exactly what it's lining up to be. Because recent polling out of the state of Indiana shows that Cruz is ahead by double digits. And if that's the case, it will essentially take away enough delegates that even Trump will not be able to clinch the 1237 delegates that's necessary to achieve a simple majority. Because if you really think about it, that number, 1237, is not some arbitrary number. That is the number to have 51% or a majority. That's what you need to clinch the nomination. And in fact, that's what will happen in a contested convention. It will be voted over and over again by the delegates until, finally, one of the candidates has enough for a majority. So, it's technically not stealing an election. You see, that's another false perception that has been thrust down our throats by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, as well as the followers of Trump. It's all part of this false narrative to try and demoralize those of us that want to see the government return to strict adherence to the principles contained in the clear and concise language of our shared Constitution. They want to do that because they want to continue the type of vile corruption that we have seen repeat itself over and over again, particularly throughout these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. But this is a problem that has been with us for decades. It is a problem that has been festering for a long time. Because if you go back into the 20th century and take a look at the rebirth of the conservative movement, it wasn't until 1964 with Barry Goldwater that conservatism came back to the surface. It had been dormant or dead since the time of Calvin Coolidge. And it was the Great Depression that had perceptively closed off or killed off the conservative movement in the United States. Why? Because, again, a progressive type Republican, in fact, a businessman and an outsider, who you found in Herbert Hoover, had failed policies which led to the worsening of the Great Depression, and then it was doubled down on by FDR. But because FDR had the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media in his back pocket, they never painted the New Deal as worsening the problem or exacerbating the problem, and that is all part of a false narrative or perception. Well, we're seeing a repeat of that now. We're seeing a repeat of a claim that will be foisted on a so-called conservative who's no more conservative than Barack Hussein Obama. And of course, who am I speaking of? The New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald J. Trump. The reason I say this is it is a repeat of what happened with Hoover, because he will be blamed for polarizing the party. He makes the repeated claim that he's a conservative when nothing could be further from the truth, and that is the narrative that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, working in tandem with the salivating mainstream media, will double down on. They will pass that off as the truth, even though it is not the truth. Just as they passed off the truth that Herbert Hoover was some great paragon of conservative values, and that is what led to the disastrous Great Depression. You see, this is also where history is a great teacher, because it becomes a predictor for the behavioral patterns that you will see in modern times and future conduct. It is a way to measure out how people will react to certain situations, and it will allow you to see just what sort of deceitful tricks are in the works. And believe me, folks, what we're seeing with Donald J. Trump is nothing more than a great con game. And it's all proven by the fact that he surrounds himself with guilt by association with people like John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, John Huntsman. There it is, folks. There is the truth. They say Cruz is part of the establishment, but that's just mere projection on the part of the Trump camp because they don't want you to pay attention to the truth. It's essentially pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Again, it comes down to this false narrative and perception that Donald Trump is a political outsider. I repeat that because it's so amazing to hear people say that that is why they support Donald Trump. But when you look at what he's done throughout his life and the contributions he's made, it does not mean that he's an outsider. People have gotten this perception that Donald Trump is an outsider because he's never held political office. Well, the funny thing is, if you look at Reince Priebus, the current chair of the RNC, he never held political office either. Therefore, by that definition, he too would be a political outsider, except that he's championing the so-called establishment or detente wing of the gutless opposition party or GOP. But that's the thing. Donald J. Trump has also been championing the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. He gave $100,000, according to Andrew McCarthy in his piece with the National Review, to John Boehner's super PAC, which was designed to defeat any efforts to primary out gutless opposition party detente members during primary seasons. He gave an equal amount of money to Clinton's super PAC. He also gave $60,000 to Mitch McConnell's detente wing super PAC. All of this time, he has been funding the very things that his followers have been railing against all throughout this 2016 election cycle. It shows that he is a duplicitous individual, that he is basically opportunizing off of the anger and rage felt by the base of the Republican Party. That's something that a huckster and a charlatan, as well as a snake oil salesman, does. And Donald Trump is a master manipulator. I'm not saying that the Trump supporters are necessarily unintelligent for being conned by this confidence man. I know that I've repeated that on past episodes of the Wright Flyer. It's that they are being abused, and they don't realize it. That's not to say they're stupid. Anyone who gets a dose of Stockholm Syndrome is never going to admit that they're being abused. It's because he wasn't the initial abuser. The initial abuser were the John Boehners, the Mitch McConnells, the various liars who have gone up there, like current Speaker of the House Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan. They made all of these grandiose and verbose promises, especially during the midterm elections of 2014, and they have failed to deliver on each and every one of those promises. Is it any wonder, then, that there is justified anger on the part of the base? No, there can be no question that this anger is justified. That is natural. It's understandable. People are angry. But this idea that Donald Trump is an insurgent outsider who is now waging a holy crusade against another insurgent outsider, that of Ted Cruz, who was actually battling things like the Gang of Eight bill when Donald Trump was funding it. Folks, the type of duplicity that we see running rampant in Capitol Hill couldn't occur without their donors. The charlatans couldn't secure their offices without the monetary backing of someone like Donald Trump. Therefore, to claim that Donald Trump is not an insider is a laughable joke at best. He is the epitome of an insider, just like Reince Priebus. But that's not how the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been portraying this story. They don't want that to be the message, because, again, what is their goal? Their goal is the utter destruction of this representative republic as our founding fathers designed it. They're out to destroy American polity, and that means that you must first and foremost strip sovereignty from the rightful holders of sovereignty. Now, when looking at the language of the preamble to our Constitution, we find that it states in the first line that we the people are the ones that came together, delegating certain authority and power to the government. And when power is delegated and authority is delegated, that power and authority can be taken away. But again, this is not known due to the revisionist history that is being taught in our institutions of education from primary level all the way to postgraduate level. What's worse is that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have doubled down on a utopian, Fabian socialist agenda that also does not want that message to resonate with the American people. So, all of a sudden, instead of the American people looking to themselves as the rightful arbiters of authority and power, and therefore the only ones who are endowed with the authority by the very design of this government to save the country, they're looking for a strongman to save the country. It is the epitome of the Cloward-Priven principle. Remember, those two Fabian socialist academics came together and designed a system to overwhelm the American system of polity, to force the American people to beg the government to save them, even though it was that very government that created the problems, either through inaction or by direct and deliberate failed policies. That's what we're seeing play out throughout the two disastrous terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. And make no mistake about it, folks, we would see a continuation of that under a Donald Trump presidency, if by some cruel twist of fate he manages first to secure the Republican nomination and two, manages to defeat Hillary Clinton, someone whom he has donated substantial amounts of money to. You see, it's all a charade. It's all a deception put out there, dressed in clothing to make people think that it is something that will save them, that it is a paragon of conservative virtue when it is a poison pill. That, tied in with the false narrative on Ted Cruz that he is somehow an insider, that he is a part of the establishment. Well, yes, there are certain elements of the establishment that have thrown their weight behind Cruz. But as you can see, the others, like Chris Christie, like John Boehner, have lined up their support behind Donald Trump. Now, that speaks more to me than the so-called tepid support Cruz has received from Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney said that he wasn't exactly voting for Cruz, that he was just doing it to stop Trump. Why? Because there's a little bit of bad blood between them. But ultimately, their goals are the same. They both wanted a form of universal health care. Remember that Romney was the architect of Romneycare in Massachusetts. And Trump, even in this 2016 election cycle, has come out and said that the three most important aspects of the federal government, the three duties of the federal government, are to provide health care, education, and housing. Now that's a laughable joke. I would like to find where in the Constitution that those are the duties, responsibilities, and obligations of the federal government. Because if you remember, the way that our federal government is designed by the Constitution itself, that branch of government must trace its authority back to a power that is specifically enumerated to it by the clear and concise language in the Constitution. And I think I've found it. Article non, section existent, clause 0. That's right, folks, it's not there. But again, Donald Trump doesn't understand this, because when he said that he didn't read the Constitution because it didn't have any value in it, we can see why. It doesn't have value to him anyway, because he doesn't want the government to be limited. He thinks that the government in any industrialized or advanced nation should be the arbiter of these things for the people. But that's not the way our system was designed. That is the form of totalitarianism that you find in tin-pot dictatorships and failed socialist nations. But the United States of America was never meant to be a socialist nation. It was meant to be a representative republic in which we, the people, are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty. But again, due to the consolidated efforts of the Fabian socialists, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, and the historical revisionists, that has been forgotten. It is part of this concerted effort to besmirch, belittle, and destroy the national heritage, character, spirit, and above all, identity of the American people, all to promote a false socialist system. But that does nothing for us. In fact, that pits American citizen against American citizen. But the disingenuous and vulgarian way that Donald Trump has conducted himself throughout this presidential primary season thus far has been to raise questions about him. Why has he not attacked Hillary Clinton? Well, when you see that he donated as much as $100,000 to her super PAC, it makes sense that he wouldn't attack her. He was her biggest donor when she was running for the Senate. And he even said that she was doing a great job as Secretary of the State. He even said that Barack Hussein Obama was doing a great job. And he supported the type of financial incentives, such as the green energy incentives, that Obama engaged in. This, coupled with how he has consistently shifted on the left on social issues as well, such as the transgender bathroom issue, just again demonstrates, at least by guilt by association, that he is not an outsider. Would an outsider support these views? No, because when you look at the way that Capitol Hill views the American people, the outsider would be somebody who supports the American people. They have so beaten us down that there are now even conservatives who are starting to view those who wish to restore the Constitution and to implement strict adherence thereto at all levels of government as it was designed to be used. That's now considered an extremist point of view to hold. You know, wanting to enforce the law is now considered an extremist point of view to hold. It is beyond belief what they are doing, until you realize that it is all about lies, deceptions, and the control of power. Trump has associated himself also with white supremacists. Now, I know that many of his followers are like, this is just a lie from the media. But it's not. You see, Scotty Nell Hughes and Wayne Dupree have pushed up another pro-Trump video, which was actually produced by a group claiming to be about Aryan rights, a white supremacist group. This in conjunction with his inability for a while there to disclaim an endorsement by former Klansman David Duke just shows that he is playing a dangerous game. And then the whole David Duke thing is laughable too, because if you recall when he was trying to tell Jake Clapper on CNN that he didn't know who this man was, he didn't know that David Duke was associated with the Klan, is a bunch of bunk, because he pinned an op-ed article in a 2000 edition of the New York Times explaining one of the reasons why he left Ross Perot's Reform Party was because it allowed in a bigot like David Duke. So, again, we see that he's trying to weave a web of deceit and pull the political wool over the eyes of the base. Except that with his supporters, that tends to, unfortunately, be true. Because again, they have closed their eyes to reality. Driven to the point of blind rage and fury, they don't want to hear the truth. Because it would be devastating to the fact that they have projected their own persona, their own identity, their own self-image and worth onto him. That is what carnival barkers do. They get you to tear down your legal faculties, not legal, but mental faculties down, and to just rawly emote, which leaves you very susceptible to manipulation. And that's what Trump does. He's a salesman, and he's making a pitch. But that old legal adage, caveat emptor, buyer beware, comes to mind. Because if it sounds too good to be true, 9 times out of 10, folks, it is too good to be true. That's the problem with Donald Trump. That's the problem with the narrative that he has been spinning and the obstruction of the truth that he has been promoting. And, of course, when his top personnel, with Paul Manafort there, goes and states that what we've been seeing is just a projection, it all makes sense. It's all an act to get the marks to buy into his con. And once they've done that, either by having such a strong ego or being so blinded by embarrassment, they're going to stay on with that come hell or high water. They will stay with him to the bitter end. That is not political genius, that is the genius of a sociopath. And there is no question that what Donald Trump has been doing here is playing the part of a sociopath. But at the same time, we see that he is fulfilling all of the two-dimensional caricatures by which the left attempts to typecast the right in this country. And why are they doing that? Because it allows them once again to push a false narrative, to develop this false perception by which they can then use it to silence an entire political movement by ostracizing them unfairly. You see, this is the danger that a Donald Trump presents. It's not the mere party that he's threatening to destroy, which he certainly is. It's conservatism itself. That is why there are so many conservatives that have joined the Never Trump movement. And to blame them for Trump's failure is beyond belief. They are acting on solid principles found within the 4 corners of our Constitution. They are acting within accordance of their conscience. After all, isn't that why we have voting? Isn't that why we are allowed to vote on a secret ballot? Of course. It is because that is the way that a representative republic with democratic elections must work, and it is the way that our founding fathers developed and designed this country to run. But again, because of the narrative that has been spun by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, many have come to believe that that is an extremist and obstructionist position to hold. When in fact nothing could be further from the truth, because that is the position that will maintain the vitality and validity of this representative republic for posterity. You see, as popular sovereigns, we are tasked with this duty and obligation and responsibility to not only preserve the Constitution, but to ensure that future generations are able to enjoy it in relative comfort and safety, and to a greater extent than even we ourselves were able to enjoy it. But that is something that has been lost along the way, due to this incessant attack by the nefarious Fabian socialists who have sunk their claws into the body politic of the United States. They are pumping their venom into our education institutions, into our information media outlets, and into the various branches of government and levels of government. And they are patient. You see, Donald Trump is an ally for them. He has funded them to a greater extent than he ever has any conservative movement. He even used to say that the reason he originally left the Republican Party was that it went too far to the right. And what Paul Manafort was telling concerned members of the Republican establishment was that, don't worry, the real Donald Trump will be seen. And of course, this goes in line with some of the things that Dr. Ben I'm a Victim Carson said, that the Trump in private is different than the Trump in public. But I don't want somebody who is so diametrically opposed that he has different faces and facades, because what I want right now, and what a vast majority of Americans want right now, and what any true red-blooded constitutionalist desires right now, is a steady, consistent constitutionalist that will rein in this out-of-control government. Because every problem that is currently facing the United States of America right now is rooted in this divorcement and departure from our Constitution. The further we walk away from the Constitution in the halls of government, the more decay we see ramp up all throughout this great republic of ours. That leads to the next problem. Why is Donald Trump being compared to Ronald Reagan when he is associating himself with people like John Boehner? You know, Reagan was very conservative in his first term, and his advisors, and by his own actions in his second term, he started to deviate. But he was never one to fully support government intrusion and encroachment, and he never would have supported something like the transgender bathroom issue that Donald Trump has supported. Now we see that Target, the store that was basically telling people to get over it and that they would make gender neutral all of their restrooms, being severely impacted by this stance. Their stock is plummeting. People are refusing to go to the store. The boycott has reached over 1 million signatures. This in less than a week. Folks, the tensions in this country are at a boiling point, and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been hammering on this. They have been fanning the flames. Why? Because they want the ultimate destruction of this country. Now, there are those who are Trump supporters who might very well want to see the system collapse, to see it utterly destroyed so that we can start anew. The problem is we have nothing in place to ensure that our fundamental and inalienable rights are protected, nor do we have anything in place to ensure that a limited government would take its place. In fact, the very firebug who's trying to set all these brush fires in the body politic of the United States is a bit of a totalitarian. He has this dictatorial streak. He says that only he can solve problems, and when he says to do something, people do it because he said so. That doesn't correlate with a representative republic in which we are the true sovereigns. It doesn't speak to a government which is of expressly limited powers. That's an expansionist. That's an expansionist that is driven by ego and ego alone. Folks, the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is of that mindset. That's the last thing we should be letting anywhere near the reins of political power. Haven't we suffered enough already under these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime? Why would we want to put in a 3rd term of it? And that brings up something that Alexander Hamilton mentioned, which is that if you want to, or if you are forced to have an enemy in the positions of power, best that it be a full enemy that is not connected to you, so that you can resist it. Otherwise, it's going to come back and besmirch you. You see, Donald Trump is a Democrat trying to wear an ill-fitting Republican suit. He's trying to portray himself as a conservative, and it's not coming off naturally because he is not naturally conservative. He is naturally diametrically opposed to all of the things that we hold near and dear. That makes him even more dangerous than Hillary Clinton. Because at least with Clinton, we know that the GOP will feign that they will fight. But with Donald, they can't, because of another perception that will be created, that this civil war, the bad blood that was started during the primary season, will have bled over into the post-election, and that the party is hopelessly divided. So then you will see again this narrative of a tyranny of false unity, like they tried with McCain, like they tried again in 2012 with Mitt Romney. We're starting to see that start now, with people like John Huntsman coming out and saying that Trump is the inevitable nominee and that we all need to throw our support behind him and divert our attention to Hillary Clinton. Why? This battle is not over. Hillary is not going anywhere. Hillary's record has not changed. Hillary can be fought and defeated. But it's going to take somebody who is a constitutionalist, somebody who hasn't given money to Hillary in order to defeat her. Otherwise, when we're putting a Democrat up against another Democrat, it's insanity to try and think that you can out-Democrat a Democrat. A, because it alienates your own political base. B, because the Democrats have been doing this a lot longer and are a lot more committed to it. And C, because your platform is not designed to be that way. That would explain why Trump has been going out and trying to change the pro-life platform of the Republican Party, because it's a position he doesn't really hold. His sister doesn't hold it. And remember, now that we have a vacancy on the Supreme Court, he has said in the past that his sister would make a fantastic Supreme Court justice. Folks, he's already told you, basically, who he's going to nominate. And she is a Democrat, a hard-line, utopian, Fabian socialist who was appointed to the federal bench by none other than Bill Clinton. The man who, along with his wife, who's running for the highest office in the land now, were guests of honor at Trump's third wedding to the Czech thumper. These are facts. That doesn't mean that this was some slow, incremental evolution that occurred on the part of Trump. By no means. Because as late as 2014, he was still supporting Terry McAuliffe, and Terry McAuliffe is by no stretch of the imagination a die-in-the-wool Fabian socialist, a supporter of the Fabian cause that is dominating the Democrat Party right now. And you see, this is why the country continually moves further and further to the left. The left always champions a socialist, and they always push to achieve socialism. That's who they idolize. And apparently there are some on the right now who are so angry that they're championing it as well in Donald Trump, because they're not questioning what his positions are. They are not looking into that as a real problem. But you see, guilt by association works both ways. Yes, there's guilt by association with what Trump's doing, and with his friendships with people like Chris Christie, people like John Boehner, people like Mitch McConnell. And then there's also guilt by association that the false perception and narrative will push forward. You see, they'll blame conservatism for this. Guilt by association that they will use to try and finally defeat conservatism once and for all. You see, that's the nefarious game that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party has played all along. And Trump has been the primary backer and supporter of that type of chicanery for a very long time now. And nothing's going to change that. Certainly not by the time we reach the general election. And remember, guilt by association also ties into perception. And the perception here is, if you recall, with John Kerry, when he was running against George W. Bush back in 2004, he was a flip-flopper. That's what killed him. Ultimately, that is what destroyed his candidacy. Well, Donald Trump flips-flops much more at a much more accelerated rate than Kerry ever did. How is that going to play off against a very patient, conniving, and cunning criminal and crook like Hillary Clinton? She's a cold-blooded snake. She's been wanting this power for over 8 years now, and she sees an opportunity to have it, and Donald Trump is the weakest frontrunner that the GOP has put up in living memory. These, again, folks, are facts. Facts that the salivating mainstream media chooses to ignore. Facts that cheerleaders for Trump like Ann Coulter and Sean Hannity choose to ignore. And why? Why do they do that? Because it would be embarrassing to admit that they have been bamboozled, that they have been hoodwinked, that they bought into the snake oil salesman's pitch, and they have been led down the path of duplicity. Yet, that is where we are. That is the truth. That is what we cannot escape. But they will double down on this because, again, they believe in perception over reality. Folks, it all comes down to one of those old adages that talk is cheap. Donald Trump is a bunch of talk, but he's not about actual conservatism. He may play a good lip service to it, even though his speeches are incoherent, but when it comes down to it, his core principles are lacking. He doesn't show a full support of it. Why? Because never once in the entire breadth of his adult life has he ever been a committed constitutionalist. Indeed, by his own admission, as I've previously mentioned both on past episodes and earlier in this episode, he said that he never really read the Constitution because he never saw the value in it. Now, how can you say that and yet want to hold the highest office in the land, which derives all of its authority from the United States Constitution pursuant to Article 2? You see, there's a major disconnect here, one that is being peddled by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to create a false perception that Trump is a conservative, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Because he has never once adhered to these principles in his life, it seems awkward now. And that's why I believe he is consistently inconsistent, why he never holds a steady position. And it gives me political whiplash to watch the way he moves from one position to the next in the span sometimes of the same sentence. That's asinine, and it does not build a strong candidate, which further explains why he is the weakest Republican frontrunner of living memory. It's because he is not fully committed to the principled campaign that he claims to be. And aren't we tired of this dishonesty? Aren't we tired of being force-fed a bunch of nonsense that is nothing more than lies and deceit? I thought that was part of the problem with the detente wing of the gutless opposition party that the base has had, and why we're seeing so many of their choice candidates being kicked to the curb as early on in this primary season as New Hampshire. The one that remains in a crusade of vanity, to steal McCarthy's words, is none other than John Kasich, whose own campaign staff manager, Chris Black, has been in a business relationship and partnership with Trump's main fixer-upper, Paul Manafort, for years, and they have represented some of the most vile, disgusting dictators that this world has ever produced. Yet, here we are, in the midst of the 2016 presidential election cycle, and we're hearing more of the same. We're hearing the tap dance that Trump is the inevitable nominee, that he will redefine conservatism, and this is the new conservative movement. But why is it that the conservative movement needs to be redefined? Why is it that everything that is a supposed redefinition is nothing short of revisionism? Like the revisionist history that is being peddled to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which haven't been born yet. You see, we are in such a true identity crisis right now that we don't even know where to begin to actually start saving this country. But again, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, believe in more than just pointing out the problems and analyzing the problems that exist. We also seek to provide you with real-world, workable, and practical solutions that will help bring this country back to track so that we go back to being a prosperous, representative republic once again. And of course, the answer seems so simplistic because it is so simple. That's why so many people overlook it. The key to resolving all of the problems that currently face the United States and her citizens is the Constitution. It's been with us since the inception of this great republic over 230 years ago, and it is the way in which we can unlock the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, oppression, servitude, and bondage, thereby allowing the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty to take upon themselves the duties, obligations, and responsibilities that are placed onto them by the natural law tenets that underpin and form the foundation of our constitutionally endowed republic. But again, this is not the sort of message you will hear peddled by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They're diametrically opposed to it. And again, you look at all of the free airtime that they give to the gutless opposition party's frontrunner, Donald Trump, and that notion of guilt by association comes to the surface once again, because he seems to be chummy with a lot of the media. He seems to demand that they throw him softball questions, and he can then play a campaign against them as though being hostile towards a groveling media is a true talking point. You see, it's all kabuki theater. Of course, in the end, should he, by some cruel twist of fate, manage to secure the GOP nomination, the media will turn on him in a heartbeat. They will change their strategies, and the drums of war will sound from every media outlet in this country. It will be a crusade against him, and the Teflon coating will be removed. And at that point, it'll be too late. And victory for Hillary Clinton will be a foregone conclusion. Now, this is not me making something up. It's just a self-written campaign. Because again, the fact that Donald Trump has never once held truly a consistent position throughout this 2016 election cycle will be seized upon by the Fabian socialists. Hillary is a master manipulator, even better than Donald, and she will be able to obliterate him because she knows where all of his skeletons in his closet are. She knows how to hit back, and his own problems, like that of a recent accusation of rape by a girl who claims he raped her when she was 13 at a pedophile party. Whether that's true or not, it's damning. And remember, perception in politics is a very powerful tool, unless you know how to use perspective to change it. But Donald doesn't know how to use perspective. Donald knows perception. But the problem is, when he goes to return fire on Hillary Clinton, he's going to come across as desperate, out of touch, as mean-spirited. All of his foibles will come to the surface. And then there's the fact that he's come out in the past and praised her in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And that provides her with all the ammunition she needs to sink his campaign. That, coupled with the alienation of the vast majority of the conservative base, means that he will not get a bedrock of conservative support going into this. So, going into the general election, he's already going to be fighting an uphill battle. an uphill battle that has been of his own creation due to his vulgar, brash, and bombastic style. His arrogance knows no bounds, and that does not sit well with the American electorate. You see, poll after poll has shown that he loses. His negatives are higher than any other candidate in the history of the record of that. It's amazing because it shows that he is an untenable, unelectable candidate. But all the while, the usual ones who used to say that we had to accept every detente member of the gutless opposition party because conservatives are unelectable are saying that he is electable, are saying that he's the inevitable candidate and that we should just throw in the towel and throw our support behind him. But again, they're doing this for duplicitous reasons. Then, when he goes to defeat, they will claim that he was the outsider, because that has been the media narrative ever since he first officially threw his hat in the ring during last summer. They will use that to hammer down on the point that, look, this proves once and for all that conservatives can't win. Or, on the flip side of that, should Ted Cruz win the nomination in a contested convention and then go on to defeat in the general election, they will also use that to try and say that conservatism is at fault. Either way you slice it, the detente wing has figured out a way to cover itself. And that's what it's hoping for. It is hoping for a defeat in the general election. And they're going to push down on that time and again. But we can see through that. And if you go back to the truth, which is by its nature lacking of an agenda, then you find that Donald Trump is not a conservative. You can make that point. And yes, eventually it will break through the web of deceit that has been created by the guilty association of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. These things work in tandem. They work hand in hand. They are all part of the same apparatus of deceit. The problem is that there are too many in America that have just been so caught up in perception that they have forgotten how to gain perspective and have forgotten how to look for the truth. That's why social media is important. And that's why there are needs for alternatives to sources like Matt Drudge. And that gap is being filled by sites such as thelibertydaily.com. Folks, if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, go ahead and look into it. It is such a breath of fresh air to see a conservative outlet that is not part of the Drudge Breitbart axis of deceit. You see, they are filling a void, a vacuum that has been created due to the tilted slant of so-called conservative media. They're trying to fill in the gap left by the betrayal of so many who have claimed to be ardent supporters and standard bearers for conservatism for a very long time. Again, guilt by association comes in to this at all levels. Breitbart is guilty by its association with Drudge, as is Fox News, as is all of the so-called conservative pundits like Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity and Michael Savage that have endorsed Trump or have gone out of their way to bat for Trump. Hannity still tries to play this charade that he is an objective person, that he hasn't thrown his hat in with one particular candidate, but his own reporting and his own attacks on Ted Cruz show otherwise. But an interesting development that happened after the former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, attacked Ted Cruz was that Hannity went after him for calling him Lucifer in the flesh. Maybe Hannity is starting to realize that it's not a good idea to put all of your eggs in a Trump hairpiece, because you'll wind up with egg on your face. But that's the problem. These people have sold their soul, proved that they are not movement conservatives, that this is all about money and nothing more. Money's a fine thing. We all like to earn it. But when it comes to portraying yourself as a movement activist, as a voice for a downtrodden part of society, it's not good to just sell your soul, to prove that you're shills, because that proves you're being intellectually disingenuous, that you're acting in a manner that is designed merely to promote yourself at the expense of your target audience. When you betray your audience like that, they will abandon you. Fox News is starting to learn that the hard way. It's now come out that CNN has beaten them for the #1 spot and slot in primetime cable news coverage. Something that hasn't happened since 2001. Now think about that, folks. That means that there has been a mass exodus of conservatives watching the Fox News channel. And the reason for this is their slanted coverage. The way that they have either been darlings for your standard, typical detente candidate for the gutless opposition party, to now becoming a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week super PAC for the Donaldoff. It's crazy. But that is how this election cycle has played out. And in that sense, the perception that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media has been attempting to throw out there, that this is the election cycle in which conventional wisdom is cast by the wayside, has come true. Because of Fox's dereliction in their duty and their abandonment of their key and core audience, their audience is abandoning them. It is, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And the fact that they didn't see this coming just shows the hubris and arrogance that has taken over for them. And it's not going to be something that will be resolved for them in short order. That type of loss of reputation can take a lifetime to rebuild. And no one will ever trust them like they once did. Of course, they've been going downhill for quite some time now, because they have been tilted towards the detente wing of the gutless opposition party at least since the 2008 election, and probably before then. So we see that this drama plays out in the way that it has, and it is causing seismic shifts within the supposed conservative media. At this point, so many conservatives are feeling betrayed that they don't know where to turn and they don't know who to trust. There are all of these sources that are becoming part of the new resistance. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are certainly the new resistance. But you're seeing it with the Wright Scoop and Red State and the Liberty Daily and various other sources that have sprung up, such as the Resurgent and the Politichicks, which show that we do not bow down to the machinations of a faux conservative who is wanting to change the narrative and definition of conservatism for the worse. We know that the Constitution is the solution for all of the problems that face this nation. We also fully recognize and understand and comprehend that it is not a radical position or some almost fundamentalist position to want to demand that government strictly adhere to the Constitution and enforce the laws that are on the books. But you see, that has been so besmirched and belittled by the salivating mainstream media that even some in the conservative movement have started to doubt the veracity of wanting to adhere to the Constitution. They're wanting to temper it. They're claiming that it is far too mean-spirited to continue down that path. Yet, when you stop and truly think about it, what is the most empowering thing that the Constitution offers? That is the safeguards and protections that it provides to our fundamental and inalienable rights. Those positions that we must take to protect ourselves and to ensure that we can continue to exercise those rights without the fear of governmental intervention. If you want America to be prosperous again, you need to remove the restrictions on the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, thereby allowing them to take the steps that are necessary to be prosperous again. If you want to revitalize business in America and to see it return from foreign shores, get rid of the burdensome tax code and tax rates that are the highest in the developed world. It is asinine to continue to preach that. Yet Donald Trump has come out again, showing his steady shift and slant to the left, and said that he supports once again taxing the wealthiest in this country. How is that going to solve anything? And how is that in line with conservative principles and values? The simple answer is it's not. That it is a position of weakness. It is a position that is espoused by the Fabian socialists and with this leftist ideology and agenda. Whenever we put up a leftist candidate to do battle with another leftist candidate, we always lose. Because it's as I said in the last segment, you can't out-Democrat a Democrat. He should have run as a Democrat if that was going to be his platform. Except that when you stop and ask yourself what his agenda is, it becomes clear that he's been doing this to push a wedge between the base of the Republican Party, to become that proverbial Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. So here we are, facing this undeniable fact of reality, and we are ever approaching the convention that'll be held in Ohio. The question is whether Donald Trump can secure the 1237 delegates necessary to have a majority and thereby clinch the nomination. And if that's the case, what will happen to the party? First of all, if Indiana goes the way that it's looking like it's going to go, I doubt that Trump will be able to get the 1237. It becomes highly unlikely. And that means that the battle will rage in California, and then ultimately it will head to the convention, where Cruz's ground game will once again come into effect, showing that he has built a tried and true campaign based on the various aspects of our representative republic that have been there for well over a century. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean, as Trump tries to claim, that the nomination is being stolen from the New York Vulgarian. It means that our republic is working in a way to prevent there from being a tyranny of a vocal minority. Because let's face it, if Trump cannot get 1237 delegates, that is still a minority vote. You need the majority, and that is what the delegate voting system is all about, to ensure that all members of the party are represented. I can think of no more of a representative system than that. And when it goes to the general election, I can think of no more of a representative system which respects the individual, fundamental, and inalienable rights of the popular sovereigns than the Electoral College. You see, all of these systems are being attacked, once again using a false narrative. But you see, guilt by association plays its ugly hand here as well, because those that are most complaining about it, like Donald Trump, have their ties and connections with the Fabian socialists that are pushing a progressive agenda, all designed and all implemented for the purpose of tearing this country apart at the seams. The sooner we recognize this gross reality of what is facing our nation, the better off we'll be. The better suited we can then return to the Constitution and state, look, you cannot steal this country. You cannot change this country. You are not endowed with the authority to do so. You do not own this nation. You see, that's the beauty of our representative republic. That's the beauty of the foundational image that our founding fathers conjured up over 230 years ago with the inception of this nation. It all ties in to the grand idea and the revolutionary idea that sovereignty rests in the hands of the people. That is what has always distinguished us from everyone else. We were the first to try that, and it explains why our Constitution is the longest running, uninterrupted constitutional document in all of world history. And that is not some small feat. That is not some small accomplishment that should be ignored or swept under the rug. That is an integral part of what it is to be an American citizen. We are all bound to the Constitution because it is the contract that exists between we, the popular sovereigns, and the government. And when the government acts in an arbitrary and capricious manner and operates outside the scopes and boundaries that have been placed upon it by that sacred contract, they are in breach of contract, and we can make them pay for it. Because if you think about it, the damages are that they have trampled upon our rightful authority, they have abused their power, and the redress of grievance is for we the people to come together and to put them back in their place. The unfortunate thing is that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and various other nefarious and dishonest factions have come together in a guilty association to push a fraud upon the people, to strip them of hope, and to spin a false narrative which erroneously claims that the people are without power. You see, it's all part of the grand theatrical deception that has been in the works by the Fabian socialists for over 100 years. And mark my words, folks, Donald J. Trump is a pivotal part of that. He is playing the part of usurper. In one way, in fact, in the only way that he's an insurgent, is that he is attempting to redefine conservatism. That he's going out and attempting to make it a two-dimensional cutout of every nefarious caricature that the left attempts to pigeonhole the right with. That's why he hasn't been so vociferous in pushing off the support from white supremacist groups. That's why he tried to feign that he didn't know who David Duke was or with whom David Duke was associated. It's because he wants that narrative to be there, to poison the well. He's playing that part of a puppet. And how disgusting it is that he has managed to con so many people. But it makes sense when you recall that he is a master manipulator, that his entire business and media empire has been built upon this false perception. You see, it goes down the lines of any type of propaganda. He's branding and labeling. So the bombastic billionaire that we see going before the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media is a fake ideology and identity. It is a brand, something that he's created which he thinks can propel him to higher office. And that is why he has made all of these guilty associations. But in the arena of politics, guilt by association can be very destructive. But our media has not been responsible, and that's been by design. Because again, they're trying to push this propagandistic agenda that is diametrically opposed to the will of the American people. That is why the squeaky wheel is what is apparently going to push this through to a point where it will deflate the conservative movement until there can be a rekindling on the level of Barry Goldwater. But that is not something we can afford right now, when this nation is in the midst of a constitutional and identity crisis, the likes of which it hasn't known in living memory. We are teetering on the edge of oblivion. And again, it is only we, the people, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic, that can save it. There is no one else, because to turn to an individual to do it would be to abandon the principles that have worked so well for this country since its inception. And remember that because the nation is based off of natural law tenets, those very tenets and principles are timeless by their very nature. It means they're just as applicable today as they were 200 years ago, as God willing, they will be 200 years from now. Again, these are the sorts of realities that the Fabian socialists don't want you to know. These are the realities that the revisionist historians don't want you to know. These are the facts that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party chooses to ignore, but above all, it's what Trump's followers are choosing to ignore as well. Because if you choose to ignore the facts, and you refuse to learn from history, you are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. And we're seeing that play out now. The very identity and future, as well as the posterity of this nation, hang in the balance. Therefore, America, we must come together. But the only thing that unifies us as a people, going back to the inception of this nation, is our rights. Because that is the way that this republic was designed. That is the way that the natural law tenets are designed to work. And that is why it is so important that we all foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our Constitution, as well as our fundamental and inalienable rights. In so doing, we then are able to step up to those who would deprive us of our liberties and tell them no. Now, with that in mind, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol so that you can all be guilty in your association with the Wright Flyer. Speaking of guilt by association, feel free to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you have either here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And be sure to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle of @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. There you will find our departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, that of my First Officer Jeremy Grapington, and our Blogspot account, where we are also leaving guilty associations with knowledge. And you can prove your guilty association to the Wright Flyer by visiting our Cafe Press account, where you can proudly display your guilty association with apparel, drinking glasses with our logo on it, clocks, watches, ties, what have you. And there's also the First Class Passenger logo as well, which also shows that you're proud of your guilty association. Once again, folks, I'm Randy Wright, your captain, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Hope to see you next time. Do take care.